the summer of 2022, I journeyed along the Moray Coast, mostly by foot, but at the end I had a small section on bike. I did these in small day trips, but you could do the whole thing in a few days. Today I'll share the full story of this journey along with behind the scenes and advice and tips for anybody who wants to try this in the future. And in case you're new here, my name is Sarah and I'm a full-time artist living in Scotland. I live in Moray County, so it was pretty easy for me to make it to the coast for any amount of time. I could do a whole day, I could camp if I wanted, but I decided to break up the Moray Coast into multiple days. And in fact, this Moray Coast journey was the beginning of what might be a lifelong attempt to walk, cycle, or kayak around the entire coast of Scotland and islands. Of course, wouldn't it be epic if I could live on the road, live on the trail, and do the whole thing in one attempt? But I'm a busy artist and a cat mom and a wife, and I have a lot going on, so I'm just doing my best to make this dream come true little by little. So we begin the journey in Cullen, a really cute little coastal town, one of my favorite places to paint. It has a really relaxing beach with plenty of amenities, public toilets, lots of restaurants, a little beach cafe, really easy parking, and overall it's just a really enjoyable place to spend time. As you walk west after the beach, eventually you'll reach some really steep cliffs, and these are so epic, pretty much a photographer and an artist's dream. The trail kind of meanders among the rocks and then leads you up the cliffs. Here and there are stone steps, so it's pretty easy to navigate. And as you probably have noticed in my videos, I stop a lot to paint and to sketch. I also use that time to rest and rehydrate, have some snacks, and just overall really enjoy the journey. I wasn't trying to rush it because, I was giving myself full days for each section. And by the way, I did this journey solo. I brought 2 cameras, 2 tripods, and I filmed everything myself. I just really wanted to share the experience, and I knew that a lot of people around the world would enjoy it. So if you appreciate that, please give the video a thumbs up. In addition to the stunning cliff vistas, which by the way are just so much fun to paint, there's a notable geological feature here called Bow Fiddle Rock. Very popular among tourists and photographers, so oftentimes you'll see a dozen of them with all of their big lenses lining up along the cliffs. And this spot is only a short walk from the village itself. If you continue west along the cliffs, eventually you make it to the Portknockie harbor, where there are some free public toilets and a little beach. There are plenty of little shops and restaurants in the village itself and lots of B&Bs, so it might be a good place to stop after your first day. As soon as you head west out of the harbor along the cliffs, you feel like you're the only one there. I was hiking on a warm summer day and I still only saw 1 or 2 people along this whole section of the trail. There's an easy trail that follows the top of the cliffs all the way to Findhorn, which is the next little town. But I found my way down to the shore and kind of backtracked along the rocks because they were just fascinating to me and I love sketching rocks. I could easily spend a whole day just wandering the base of these cliffs. Findhorn is a small fishing village with a very sketchable harbor. There are only a couple restaurants as far as I know, but there are quite a few B&Bs, so maybe another great place to stay along the trail. It was such a beautiful warm day, so I sketched the harbor for a while before moving west. There are a couple ways you could go west, but I decided to walk up to the large World War I and II war monument and then walk along the golf course. From here to the next main town, which is Buckie, there's not really much to see. You're mainly walking next to the coastal road at this point, and I don't really like walking near traffic, so it wasn't as enjoyable, but I just put a podcast on and tried to enjoy the views. And Buckie itself is a really big town with a lot of places to stay and eat and things to do and see, but I just walked straight through because someone had mentioned to me that there were seals in the next town. So yeah, one track mind. At the other side of Portgordon, the trail finally leaves the road and you head back into the wilderness, or as close as it gets in this area. Technically, you could walk along the shore, but it's extremely rocky and a bit unstable underfoot, so if you take the trail, you're a bit inland between some big fields. It's actually quite picturesque and peaceful and very paintable. The trail then leads you through a small forest, which technically is there to conveniently hide a recycling center and a huge quarry. In addition, parts of this forest were devastated during the 2022 Storm Eunice, which had record-breaking winds. And while the forest is still open, you do have to be careful as you navigate through these trees. At the other end of the forest, you can start to hear the sea again. And at this point, you follow a small road to Spey Bay, which is also the home to the Scottish Whale and Dolphin Centre. Besides that, there's also the golf course with a small cafe and a caravan and tent camping site. Otherwise, it's a very tiny village, but an important wildlife sanctuary where the Spey River empties into the Moray Firth. At this point in the journey, you're about a third of the way through the entire Moray Coast. On the other side of the Spey Bay is Garmouth, a very small town, and you can only get there by going inland a mile or two and then crossing the Spey Viaduct, which used to be an old railway. It was a really hot day, so it was nice to have some shade in the forest while following the river. This section of the trail is very well maintained and is part of a cycling route, so it was a little more busy, but I found some peaceful spots along the river to stop and sketch and just relax. Onwards. Not too far away is the next tiny village named Garmouth, and then beyond that is Kingston. I think there are one or two cafes and some B&Bs, but I didn't spend too much time in the village itself. I walked straight to the coast, and I found this really cool driftwood castle. I think this is why I love hiking or walking as much as possible. If I was cycling for the majority of this coastal trail, I would miss so many cool things.
How cool is that?
The majority of the trail from Kingston to Lossiemouth is very rocky, and your only companion are these World War II anti-invasion blocks and bunkers. I'm not gonna lie, this was a really long, hard section of trail for me because it was so hot on the day I was walking. I didn't have enough water or snacks, but these things are easily avoidable, so don't let this turn you off from going on this section of trail. The trail is mostly sandwiched between the shore and a forest. After a few miles, you have the option to take a detour into the forest, where the trail meanders through the trees and often shares the quarry and logging roads. I only saw 3 people for the entire 8 miles, and I was bordering on heat exhaustion by the end. But when I look back on this section of trail, it was actually really gorgeous. After what felt like forever, the trail finally opened up into the dunes. The trail turns sandy, which is a little harder to walk on, but it's nice to have a change in scenery after a really long, hot day. And soon the picturesque town of Lossiemouth comes into view. I actually don't live far from here, and I visit at least a few times a month because I love painting the dunes. But on this day, I was so hot and tired and hungry that I just made a beeline for my favorite restaurant in Moray County. It's called the Harbour Lights, and they serve all-day breakfast and the best French toast in town. Lossiemouth is a rather large town with lots of B&Bs, restaurants, cafes, shops, so much to do and see. And of course, the beaches are a huge local and tourist attraction, as you can see from how crowded this one was. We are now entering my favorite section of the entire Moray Coast. The next 11 miles has it all, from beautiful sandy beaches to impressive cliffs and stunning geological features. This region is also geologically famous for fossils, as well as Pictish carvings in some of the caves, and even dinosaur footprints. The most interesting sections are right along the coast, above and at the base of the cliffs, so there's no easy access. You can't really park and easily get to a lot of these cool features, so you definitely need to get some good walking shoes and make the effort. Things really start to get interesting about a mile after the Cowsey Lighthouse. This is where the cliffs start to rise, and at low tide you can walk along the base of the cliffs. However, do be careful and watch the tide time clocks because you can also get stranded. If you're worried about that, just take the trail that leads up above the cliffs. Doing that will also give you an amazing view. It's fascinating to think that over the last thousands of millions of years, Scotland moved from where the South Pole is to its current position. And along the way, it has experienced so many different climates, everything from tropical to deserts, and lots of volcanic activity. No, I'm not a geology expert, but my brother is a geologist, and he gave me this book for Christmas, which is a fascinating read. I'm learning so much about the formation of Scotland, and I definitely recommend it to anybody who's interested in this kind of thing. Along the way, you'll see this old lookout tower, below which is the famous Sculptor's Cave, but you can only access the cave along the shore at low tide. And again, be careful not to get stranded by the tides.
Oh my god.
For those of you interested in the cave, Elgin Museum has this video on their YouTube channel, which is like a virtual walkthrough. They scan the walls and recreate this 3D image, and it also pinpoints all of the cool Pictish carvings and points of interest. After about 2 miles along the cliffs, you reach the quarry, which is famous for dinosaur footprints and tons of fossil remains. And in the distance, you see Hopeman. But before reaching Hopeman, it's worth stopping at this secluded little beach you'll see to the right. 9 times out of 10, I have this beach to myself, but since it was a really warm, perfect summer day, there were a few people there when I arrived. A lot of people will start in Hopeman and walk east to the Sculptor's Cave and stop here as well because there's a big cave and some tunnels, and in general is just a really cool spot. I really wish I could share some drone footage of this section of trail because it would look really cool, especially from the water. However, there are flight restrictions in place in much of Moray County because of all of the Air Force bases. And I don't know about you, but I definitely don't want to be on their radar. But I hope these videos help give you a sense of scale because these cliffs are truly spectacular. For photographers, artists, or geology enthusiasts, this place is heaven. I feel like this area epitomizes the beauty and diversity of the Moray Coast, and I highly recommend it to anyone visiting Scotland. After about a mile, you'll come to Hopeman, and for the small size actually has quite a surprising amount of amenities. There's a bunch of restaurants, beach cafes, great parking, 2 beaches, public toilets, camping, and so much more. There's even a great little gallery right at the harbor. I think this would be a great town to stay along the trail if you have a bit of extra time. Hopeman Harbor is quite popular among kayakers and paddleboarders, as well as fishing and spotting all sorts of wildlife. The small East Beach will take you past the caravan site, which is popular among campers, and then the trail will meander above the rocks for the next couple miles until you hit Burghead. At low tide, this is one of the best areas to explore the rock pools. There's so much life in all of these little holes and crevices and caves among the little rocks on the shore. Although it's a little bit less than 3 miles until Burghead, I gave myself an entire day for this section because I knew I would be obsessed with the rock pools. But again, there's still so much to explore. Cliffs, caves, tunnels. It's definitely a great spot for painter variety. You could probably fill an entire sketchbook just along this coast. Now, technically the trail follows the top of the cliffs. However, once again, I was overly curious, so I decided to walk a little bit along the base of the cliffs. But the stones and the seaweed underfoot were very slippery and unstable, so don't recommend it if you struggle with balance or anything like that. After spending some time exploring all these cool little caves, I decided to head back up to the main trail. And it was at this point that I realized this was a very popular cycling route. And this actually gave me the idea to do a later section of the trail on my bicycle. And here's a fun little tip for you. If it's not too windy, using an umbrella will really help with the heat. I picked up this ultralight umbrella, which is teeny tiny, and I just throw it in my bag for days like this, which honestly it was a savior. But anyways, as I was walking along the top of the cliffs, I was just so tempted by the ocean, by the water, by the rocks, that I knew I had to go back down. The tide was going out, so there was a lot more dry space to walk on the shore, and luckily I found this tiny little trail that led down the path. I think this was about halfway between Hopeman and Burghead. I have to admit that walking among these cliffs and caves at this section scared me a little bit, and partially because I was alone and really scared of something bad happening, but also it was just a little spooky. I just felt like a teeny tiny ant, or that I was walking in some Jurassic version of our world. Wow. That's a massive tunnel. I'm scared. Pigeons or something just flew around. I did not stay long in the cave at all. I just took a quick video to show Wolfie at home later, and then I got out. My adrenaline was pumping so much. It may sound silly to some, but I'm not an adrenaline junkie. As I mentioned, these lower rocks are a bit of a challenge to walk on, so I thought it was time to head back up to the main trail. Luckily, there are a few spots that you can get up pretty easily, and it was about here that the winds really picked up, and it can change just like that. So it's a good reminder to always pack a few layers. Here's some that I recommend. I do have a link in the description to all the gear I carry on the trail, but just pack and carry whatever you can. And it's not like you're that far away from civilization. It's just good to be on the safe side. Despite the sudden gusts, I was having an amazing day, and soon I could see Burghead in the distance. You're probably wondering, what on earth is this giant, unsightly building right on the shore? I was wondering that too. It turns out it's a large maltings factory which is used in the process of making whiskey. Like many areas along this coastline, there's evidence of Pictish settlers dating back to 400 AD. The town is settled on this small peninsula, and on the farthest tip is the Pictish fort, or now visitor center, where you can learn a lot about the local history. This is also a very popular viewpoint over the Moray Firth and down towards Findhorn. Burghead is another coastal town with a lot to offer, although I didn't spend much time there. I knew ahead of me was a long day, pretty much 8 miles of beach. Although there was a bit of weather threatening in the morning, the day turned out to be really warm and beautiful. And it was the first time I took my shoes off and just really enjoyed the beach life. Once again, you'll see a lot of these anti-invasion blocks and bunkers, pretty much the whole 8 miles. And that's mostly because this area is known for being a military hotspot. There are a couple Air Force bases and barracks, and yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. But it's kind of an interesting thing to see along the beach, and as the tide has come in over the years, it has tipped them over a little bit and made them kind of wonky. And a lot of them are really crooked. After a little over 2 miles along the beach, you can walk up into the forest and you'll see the Rose Isle car park. There are also free public toilets and a burger shack, which really surprised me. The landscape in this area, as well as Findhorn and even towards forests, is a bit interesting because there are huge sand dunes. And I later found out that the trees were planted there to stabilize the dunes because way back in the day there would be huge storms and sometimes the dune sands would swallow up the nearby towns. It's actually amazing to see how these forests are growing on the sands, and there is evidence of erosion, especially right on the shore. Because the tide was coming in, I walked up the dunes and took the top trail, and in a couple more miles I saw evidence of the Kinloss Royal Air Force Base, as well as peaks of Findhorn in the distance. I was constantly in awe of the beautiful turquoise water here. It must be the fact that there's lighter colored sand below, which is just a unique feature of this area, but definitely draws the eye and inspires me to paint. Soon I saw the telltale sign of Findhorn just on the horizon, which is another long row of anti-invasion blocks. Shortly after, you'll see the iconic beach huts, which are definitely a tourist and photographer attraction. I think this is where I see the most photographers in Findhorn every time I go. Oh, and you can buy one. Findhorn is a very picturesque coastal town. It also has a big artist community and is a hot spot for water activities. This is actually where I'm planning on taking my first kayak lessons. Because the harbor is such a picturesque attraction, there are a lot of little restaurants and cafes right along the beach. And after 8 miles, I was starving, so I couldn't resist stopping at the captain's table, where I got a really filling Mediterranean salad. If you have a bit of extra time, it's worth heading into town to the Bakehouse, which is a really great bakery and cafe with so many yummy treats, and you can buy really great health foods there. If you like urban sketching, this is also a great town because there's all sorts of little alleyways and beautiful houses. But this is actually where my journey differs from the traditional Moray Coast Trail. On the official Moray Coast Trail, you would leave the coast and head down towards forests, but my journey is taking me as close to the coast as possible around all of Scotland. There's also the tricky bit where there's a giant river between me and the next section of trail. So if you want to go from Findhorn all the way to the end of Moray County like I did, you have to figure out what to do with this bit, this water area. And I decided I would start in Cullen Forest, so there's a car park here, and then I would make my way up to the point where they almost meet, and then find my way along the shore. And this whole forest is massive and there's so many trails, so it's a little bit tricky to navigate. I just did my best to find my way as close to the shore as I could, and the end of Moray County is somewhere over here, and then I just made my way back to the car park. So you could do it however you wanted, but this car park here is pretty much the main one that you have to start at. Because there were a lot of miles to cover in one day, I decided to cycle. And I have to say that it was one of the best days on the trail. As an amateur cyclist, I definitely learned a lot of lessons on this day, but it was still so enjoyable. The forest is gorgeous, especially on a sunny day. There's also a lot of variety for photographers and artists. If you can make your way to the mud flats, there's a beautiful area to paint, and it's also a good spot for wildlife. From the mudflats to the end of Moray County, it was a bit of a struggle because it was very boggy, but I was determined to be able to see water when I got to the end point. After that, I could make my way back into the forest and find my loop back to the car park. And just a little word of warning, because this forest is so massive and there's so many miles of trails, it's definitely worth to have a repair kit for your bike or lots of snacks and water and anything you might need for a very long day. I didn't mention this before, but there was actually a couple months between when I was in Findhorn and doing this final section. That was partially because we traveled to America for a few weeks, and then I caught COVID and bronchitis, and yeah, long story short, there was just a big break. And so I was doing this final section in winter, and because of that, there were not a lot of people on the trail. Luckily, nothing bad happened, and I did have phone signal for the entire thing. But it's always good to be extra prepared just in case there's a chance you could get lost or stranded somewhere where there aren't a lot of people. I moved to Moray County 3 years ago. And while this video focuses on the coast, there's also so much to see inland. And I'm not trying to act like the spokesperson for Moray County, it's just that I've really grown to love where I live. Moray County is actually quite large and extends all the way into the Cairngorms. So in addition to the beauty of the coast, you can explore the Speyside Way as well as the famous whiskey trail because there are over 50 distilleries here. And there are also many castles, ruins, and Pictish stones to explore. Another goal of mine is to visit all of the Pictish stones in Moray. I think it would be a really fun way to learn about the history in this specific region, and it would also make a really great sketch series. Thank you so much for coming along this journey with me. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and if you'd like to see more Scotland in the future, make sure you subscribe before you go. Thanks everyone, take care.